Good morning, my Cafecito colleagues. Welcome to Cafecito con Colón. Good morning, Roberta Simoni. Victoria, Carlos, good to see you this morning. Going to be an incredible hour ahead with the Honorable James B. Lewis. Like I said there on the post, he is the Dean of Public Service in America. Forget New Mexico, the Southwest America, Costa Rica, the Western Hemisphere. He is the Dean. Good morning, Sonny Kirkby. Mask Up, New Mexico. Thanks for your incredible leadership, countless hours, and for saving lives in New Mexico every day. Good morning, Latanya Mar y Ortega. You did a great job yesterday on panel. I enjoyed watching you. Thank you for sharing that. Sonny, you have fun no matter what you're doing. All right, we'll get started here in just a minute or so. It's 9:02 this morning. It is a beautiful day in New Mexico. I've been out and about, already had a 7 a.m. breakfast with a wonderful mentee of mine. That's always a great way to put gas in the tank for the day. All right. As you can see, I started to put up a couple links there to some important stories. We lost a great New Mexican, Max Evans, who was not just an incredible and famous cowboy author. He was a painter, just a great New Mexican, and he passed away. And thought I would give you the stories on that. He's not going to get as much coverage as some of our authors, but in many circles, he's just as famous. So we lift up his legend and his story of a great journey that brought good light to New Mexico. We will miss Max Evans. There's a couple of pieces about his journey. We're going to post up a couple national links, and then we're going to bring James B. Lewis straight away because I don't want to miss a minute with James. So my goal is to have him on air visiting with me before 9:10 this morning, which would be like a record for me. But if anybody can get me to listen and stop talking, it is the Honorable James B. Lewis, Mr. Incredible. I almost wore my Lobo shirt today, James, and then I pulled out my firefighter shirt because we're doing the Fill the Boot campaign. So I wanted to highlight the firefighters, but you got your Lobo red on there.
Yes, I thought you'd have yours on this morning. I wanted to match you.
Hey, but how about this?
All right, that'll work.
Now look at this. So it's a little big because it's one of those cool kids fitted hats.
Okay.
And the person who got it from me thought I had a big head. So it's a little large, but if I hold it back like that, it doesn't look too bad. But look, guess what that says?
All right.
You see those Chinese characters there?
I do. It
says Lobos.
Okay. All right. Well,
isn't that cool?
I'm glad you're interpreting for me now.
Yes, I had to provide interpretation as it was provided for me. However, it was double check, fact check, triple check, and ready to go. That is a Lobo hat. And you can actually, we got our Lobo back there.
Lobos for life.
There you go. Lobos for life, baby. One of the best UNM Alumni Association presidents in the history of our flagship institution. That would be James B. Lewis.
Well, I thank you, but I followed your lead. You laid the groundwork. You had a great foundation, and so we were just glad to follow in your footsteps.
You're the best. You're the best. Thank you for saying so, and it was an honor to serve with you on that board, bring you to us, and then wrap around your leadership. Tahir Gauba, welcome to Cafecito con Colón, one of my dear friends and fantastic Cafecito colleagues. Good to see you. Harold Polk Jr., not just an incredible veteran, not just an incredible leader in our guard, not just an incredible New Mexican, but if I have it my way, he'll be the very first African-American male to serve in the upper chamber, our New Mexico Senate. So good to see you with us this morning, Harold Pope Jr. Good to see you, Laura, one of my fantastic team members. So one of the first links I wanted to put up, you may know that Breonna Taylor is on the cover of Vanity Fair. And when I was younger, I just didn't really understand Vanity Fair, but I've come to appreciate its real fantastic writers that work with that publication, and they do some really powerful pieces. And this piece today that I'm highlighting is in fact one of those great pieces, and it's told from the perspective of Breonna's mom. And I hope you'll take a minute to review that. It's in front of the paywall as best I can tell. So check that out. And then today is, I think, the 57-year anniversary of, or this is the anniversary week of the incredible speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the I Have a Dream speech, and there'll be a march on Washington. And I think during a time that is probably more important and more powerful, more palpable than any other time, in my humble opinion, and maybe it's because I'm only 50 years old, but since that speech was delivered, whether it's you're looking through the lens of the 29-year-old Jacob Blake and the Kenosha protesters that were killed by a 17-year-old white boy who will be tried as an adult, or Breonna Taylor, or the knee on the neck that murdered George Floyd, this March on Washington on the 57th anniversary of the Martin Luther King Jr. speech will be far more powerful and important, at least in my lifetime, than any other anniversary of that incredible speech. So there are a couple of stories I want to put up about this march. You had folks all the way from Milwaukee marching 750 miles to DC for this anniversary. This highlights some of that. This USA Today highlights the naming of this anniversary march, called the Get Your Knee Off Our Necks Commitment March on Washington, and that'll be the demonstration in the nation's capital today. So tune into that. I have talked quite a bit about the suffragettes and the women's movement to have the right to vote, or at least a large portion of women in America. This is the 100th anniversary of those women who were granted the right to vote. It wasn't until about 50 or 60 years ago that all women had the right to vote. But 100 years from the suffragettes movement and their great impact in having the amendment go through 19. And this here was a great NPR piece that was done that highlights some women in that movement and some aspects of that movement. It's a short podcast, about 8 minutes, covered by KUNM and NPR about some of the women who pushed for that vote that haven't necessarily gotten the airtime, but their stories are important. The other piece that I want to put up, as it's 9:08 and I've got 2 minutes to go, I do want to, during this 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act that was passed, that incredible civil rights movement and impact of the ADA, I wanted to post this story that I found on Disability Scoop, which is a source that I subscribe to for developmental disability news. It is the leading publication for that type of news, but this really highlights, it came out this morning regarding how the pandemic is hitting families with those who have family members with disabilities, why it's hitting so much harder, whether it be isolation, whether it be lack of being able to engage with support groups for people who are caretakers for those with disabilities, and in fact, the disabled and their ability to connect, touch, and be touched by others. And this story about the pandemic hitting those families hard is an important one. Good morning, Lynn Troyan. Good to see you this morning. Thank you for joining us on Cafecito con Colon this morning. So it is 9 minutes after the hour, and I am all done with my links. So I have accomplished my goal for this morning, and I'm going to move straight away 10 minutes after the hour to provide an introduction to, I don't use living legend lightly, but if there are living legends in New Mexico, I have the honor and privilege of having one on this morning. He is not just a living legend from afar, but somebody whose fingerprints are all over my heart and my soul. He has if I have impact in public service, there is no question that credit goes to James B. Lewis. When I was very young and just starting out and trying to engage in public service through politics, James Lewis was one of those individuals who took the time with me, to share his journey, who took the time to encourage me, to inspire me. And it's no short, it wouldn't be an overstatement to say that 20 years ago, I knew in my heart I wanted to grow up to be like James B. Lewis. And what's different in particular about James Lewis, and I'm going to go through his resume, or at least a part of it, because we don't have time to do the whole thing. But if you look at who I am and how I serve, I hope to be measured by the service of James Lewis. If you watch how I communicate with others, it has been said countless times, and James, I think you know this, I've told you this, and I always consider it the highest honor. When people say, look, I could have closed my eyes and I felt like James Lewis was up there giving those remarks. I could close my eyes and I could feel James Lewis coming through you. And my hair is standing up because truly, there is not a higher compliment, because you touch people in a way with your authenticity, with your energy. Somebody wrote a piece about you. I actually think it was on your bio for the Alumni Association, and it talked about a quiet charisma. And I thought, it may be quiet charisma unless he's got a microphone. And then he is inspiring, he is bringing people to their feet, and he is bringing energy that is unmatched in the politics of New Mexico, at least in my 20 years of service. There are very few people that can move people to action and touch their hearts in the way that James Lewis does with his oratory skills. And I think part of it is because those of us that receive his words know that it's not just words. We know that there is service and substance behind those words. And I think that's what makes them so powerful. Let me tell you a little bit about his journey. He is New Mexican through and through. I don't even know where to start, other than just saying that he was born in Roswell, New Mexico. So he's a Chavez County baby, and then moved over to Gallup. So he's a Gallupian. And yes, that's correct. You call them Gallupians. And when I get that wrong, I am corrected by famous Gallupians like James B. Lewis. He is an incredible standout. He made his mark not just as being a great member of his community, but in sports and athletics in New Mexico. He was a star in football, basketball, track. And if you put a ball in his hand, he knew exactly what to do with it instinctively. And he made his mark, and he brought people together with his ability to take his skill, plus his humility, plus his charisma, and be able to show people that all should be welcome at the table and to be engaged in important conversations. And he did that. And he served all the way. I mean, his career is amazing. It's been said countless times, James B. Lewis is not the retiring type. He doesn't know what it is to retire. He's told me a couple of times he's retiring, and then he's been re-employed, I think twice since the first time he's told me he's going to be retiring. And he just doesn't know any way of life other than a life of service. And what's fascinating about James B. Lewis is that, and I think the B stands for, is it Bellevin?
That's correct.
Yes, sir. James B. Lewis is that his service is such that it's not just service in public office. It's not just service in the faith-based community. It's not just service in the business community. It's not just service in the philanthropy sector. It's not service in the social profit sector. It is service in all of those areas. And that's what I think sets James Lewis apart from the rest of us, that he has this incredible ability, capacity, breadth, and depth to be able to touch every sector of life in a substantive way. I mean, some of us may hit the surface, but James B. Lewis doesn't just go wide, he goes deep. And he makes such a difference, and he inspires all of us to work a little harder to do that. Now, he was elected as a very young man as the Bernalillo County Commissioner for, Bernalillo County Treasurer a couple of terms. And then let me get this right here. So he started out after getting his bachelor's degree, then he He's also a veteran. I think a lot of people don't know that he had a couple of years in service in our military. He put his life on the line and did his public service in the military. 2 years in the Army, right?
That's correct, as a military policeman.
Right, MP. That's right. He was an MP. He had that cool wristband or armband. He was an MP, and I'm pretty sure if he pulled me over, I'd be saying, yes, sir. And so he served in the military and then went on to get his MBA, and that's what makes him a very proud Lobo. And he got his MBA from UNM, and his service is incredible. He's worked in places like the DA's office as an investigator before he was elected. Now, get this, folks. Where are we? We're in 2020. So in 2022, it will have been 40 years since James B. Lewis first took elected office as the Bernalillo County Treasurer. It was 1982. He was the first African American to win a county-wide election in all 33 counties in New Mexico, not just in Bernalillo County, but anywhere. I mean, even in our historically densely populated counties, you go down to Hobbs America, where you think that they would have been able to bring together that African American vote and really turn that out. It wasn't until James B. Lewis was elected in 1982 as Bernalillo County Treasurer that we had our first countywide elected official who was also an African American. In 1985, Governor Anaya appointed Lewis as state treasurer after a little bit of a situation in the treasurer's office. And then he completed that term and ran for a full term in 1986, becoming the first African American to be elected statewide in our beautiful land of enchantment. Now, that's the incredible news, but here's where we got to keep on working. In 108 years, James Lewis is still the one and only statewide elected official who is African American. Now, while that's a point of inspiration for our young girls and our young boys of color, it's time to do it again. It's time to continue propelling young boys and young girls of color to be seeking statewide office. Now, this young man who is a man of color who presents without color and doesn't have some of the barriers that I would if I presented with my color, was inspired by this incredible elected official who also served Governor Bruce King as chief of staff in 1990, and then was a city administrator in Rio Rancho. And my surrogate mom, Ophelia Munzer, I think there's only maybe one person alive that she loves more than she loves me, and that might be James B. Lewis. She knows that James Lewis, as she would say, he was one of the first VIPs in public service who welcomed them, made them feel important, made them feel loved, and actually engaged them in true conversation. And that's because there is nobody that James Lewis comes into contact with who is invisible. He sees and hears every single person that comes into his orbit and into his space. He served under President Bill Clinton. He served at the Department of Energy, and I think did 2 stints in the federal government, one in the Office of Development and Diversity, and then under Secretary Richardson, also served in energy. In 2001, he followed a bid for mayor to work in the mayor's office at the city of Albuquerque as CAO, COO, and held the highest ranking position for an African American in the city of Albuquerque in that administration. In 2006, he ran again for state treasurer of New Mexico. He served about 13 years in that office altogether. No one has ever, nor will they ever serve longer in the office of the state treasurer. He rose all the way nationally in an organization that I am a member of now in NASDAQ, the National Association of State Treasurers, Comptrollers, and Auditors, as its national president, and served there with distinction. I just want to say that I could continue going on and on and on, but it is now 9:19, and it is time to hear from this living legend and this man who has made me a better human being, this Black man who continues to inspire with his service. He says he's not a politician, he's a public servant, and no truer words have ever been stated in New Mexico's political landscape. James Lewis, I love you, I appreciate you, you've made me who I am, and thank you for coming on Cafecito con Colon today.
Brian, let me just say that's reciprocal. Again, lead by example. And my concern is thank you for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank all your viewers for viewing today. Also, just again, born in Roswell, people may not realize that when we talk about what's going on today, when I started first grade, schools were segregated. So therefore, I couldn't go where I wanted to go. I had to go to an all-black school, which is called Carver, George Washington Carver, and it was from elementary all the way through high school. Then we moved to Albuquerque my second year, and it was a culture shock because there was not one black teacher in the Albuquerque public schools. Next year, they had a lady by the name of Loretta Loftus, who was the only black teacher, and she taught special education. So I was looking for these role models as I was going on my journey. And then again, my last 3 years in high school was Gallup, where I was an all-state running back, lettered in basketball and track. And you know, one of the things about playing athletics, and that's one of the things that I wanted to mention, is that as I travel around this state running for public office, I had people come up to me, are you the same James Lewis that played football for Gallup? The county manager down in Deming, and John Arthur Smith, every time he sees me, he said, the manager said, tell you hi, because we played a by-district game against Deming, and we played to a 14-14 tie. So, you know, and I didn't know until almost 20 years later, he came and gave me an article saying two of the best backs, a guy by the name of Harrelson from there and me from New Mexico, two of the best backs in the state of New Mexico. But that's how you get friendship and kinship around the state. And I heard the same thing when I went up to places like Taos. It was just amazing that you had no idea people were following your career. But let me also say that during these turbulent times that we're living in today, and we're talking about civil rights and human rights, and the thing that stuck with me is how can you make a difference? And that's why the term public servant. When I decided to run for public office, I thought about what John F. Kennedy said. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So I tried to mimic that. So after getting my master's from UNM, I had no idea what running for public office was all about. And so I went and talked to a lot of folks, and a lot of folks said, no, you don't want to do that. Other folks said, do you think that they would allow a black man to handle their money? So you don't need to run for treasurer, you need to run for something else. People don't realize, in my first race, we could not even have our kids answer the telephone because we got all kind of threats here at the house. You better give up in or you're going to die. So nobody know that side of it, but it was very turbulent times, very difficult in reference to the threats that we received in our home. So on and on. So I can identify what's going on today, because as we're looking at what's on the ballot, you know, fairness, equity. And when you look at what this COVID has done, it shows the disparity in reference to health and healthcare, disparity in reference to economic wealth. When you look at the Wall Street article that said that, you know, the white America is making about what, 179,000, 169 average, whereas most minorities are averaging only about $19,000. There's a big disparity there. So, and when people say, you know, take your knee off of my neck, we've been saying all our life, get your foot off of my neck. And until they visualize, like in the 60s, when they went to Birmingham and Bull Connor sicked the dogs on the folks that were marching just for the right to vote. They not only sicked the dogs on them, and they actually had billy clubs and they saw them beating them. This actually mobilized the rest of the country. People came from the north in the 60s to go and walk and march. People like Viola Davis, who was Jewish, who lost her life in that march, and she left 3 kids behind. But that was the dedication and commitment that we had. Those are the things that helped give me a foundation in my life And one of the other things that I thought in reference to public life, one of the first things that was asked me, what have you done for this party? Well, I served probably almost 14, 15 years as a ward and precinct official. Well, we had a lady by the name of Mary Lou Haywood, white, came to the NAACP and said, how come none of the blacks are involved in the ward and precinct? Most of us had no idea what that was. Right. And so people like Clarence Smith, people like Al Sawyer, who became a ward and precinct official. That's how we got involved, is somebody came to the NAACP and said, this is what you need to do to get involved. You got to pay your dues. You got to get involved in the process. You got to understand the process. So you got to educate yourself. So those are things that that laid the foundation for us. And I've never stopped getting involved. I've never stopped. And I said when I ran for public office, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I want to run my own business from the public sector side. You know, we use that term in the private sector. And I said, well, if you're an entrepreneur, you're the boss. As you're running your own company, you're the boss. So you can look at hiring, you can look at policy, you can look at making a difference. So those are the things that motivated me. And when I got ready to start learning about public speaking, I looked at people like Jesse Jackson, like Dr. Martin Luther King, like John F. Kennedy. And I tried to see if I could get a...
Are you pulling my notes? Did you get a copy of my notes before we started today?
I did not, but...
I have all these questions. Look, the first question, tell me about racially segregated school first grade, and tell me about the Moore's restaurant in the South Valley. Tell me about how Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy impacted your speaking ability. I got all these questions here. You just keep on going. I'm just going dark over here. You just keep on going. I love it. Well, that's hilarious. I literally, you're like going through my questions. I love it.
I had no idea you were going to ask these, but you know, I just thought that I would look at the flow of my life and you know, serving in the military. It was during the Vietnam era. And I, as a military policeman, when I came out of Fort Gordon, out of MP school, out of a company of 300 plus, there was only about 7 or 8 that went to Vietnam, because this was in 1971. And the rest of us was deployed around the state, because there was people coming back with opiate addictions and other type of addictions. And so they
thanks to our federal government, by the way, we learned later.
Definitely. And so with these types of things, you know, we had President Nixon declared war on drugs. We're still declaring war on drugs today. And so to criminalize this, we need to get help. And we had actually short-term programs in the military where we co-mingled people that had alcohol issues and people that had drug addiction. And we wound up that they got start experimenting with each other's drugs. That didn't work, so we had to split it up. So this has been a long battle in this country, and 80% of all the drug use is in the United States of America. You know, and that is one of the things that people don't realize. And so these are the types of things that public policy is very near and dear to my heart, to make a difference, to make a change in reference to policy, procedure, and leadership, because you have to provide the leadership where people will follow you. You're just out there. And I'm going to stop at this point to see if I can get you to ask some of your questions that you have for me.
No, you just keep on going. I think people are enjoying the monologue. You know, I could listen to you for hours, and frankly, I have. You know that. I take your counsel every chance we get. We were doing good for a while before COVID, and with our regular sit downs, and you know, like I say, it's not an overstatement to say you've been one of the most impactful men in my life. I lost my father when I was a teenager, and there have been very few father figures in my life, and I think, James, you know that you're one of those for me, and I appreciate it. It means it has meant a great deal to me over the years, and I hope you know my level of gratitude for that. But let's, you know, taking you back to one of the places where you were, which is talking about athletics. And you know, yesterday we had Kenny Thomas on, and had I planned, like if I had been a master planner, I would have said, okay, well, there's going to be this big uh, 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 walk out from the court on Wednesday. So Thursday, I'll have Kenny Thomas on. And then don't forget, the March on Washington is going to be on Friday, the anniversary of the Dr. Martin Luther King speech. And 3 people substantially impacted James B. Lewis's oratory skills. And that was Ronald Reagan, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Jesse Jackson. So we'll have James on Friday. But I can't say that I was that smart. It just so happens that Kenny was on yesterday and you're on today. And so it's perfect timing. What I want to ask you, Mr. Lewis, is how do we, I guess, how did you depart? How did you depart? Because you were such an athletic superstar, right? Like, you're renowned. You even said it. Everybody from one of the most powerful legislators in the history of the state of New Mexico wants to take you back to your sports days, to just about everybody else. So how did you break away from the whole paradigm of being an incredible athlete, being a Black man, and having the paradigm of shut up and dribble? I mean, I really thought about that a lot. It's like, how did James transition from being seen as an athlete to a man with capacity to lead, whether it be in the DA's office or the treasurer's office, and then onward from there to being the most prolific, impactful, and successful African-American in public service in 108-year histories of New Mexico?
Well, Brian, let me just say, foundation. My mother just passed away, but she was 89. She worked until she was 85. So she had that strong will, that strong work ethics. And her and my grandmother used to clean houses at the office at Roswell at Walker Air Force Base. And so I used to watch them with the integrity that they would have. And, they were saying, if you're ever going to do anything, let's make sure you do it right. Don't have to do anything. But I think my life experiences, when you talk about leadership, you really have to exemplify and personify leadership in athletics. And again, as a running back, basically everybody was counting on me to get the yards that we needed. In basketball, you're a team player. In track and field, you are a person that's individually out there, whether you're running the sprints or whether you're broad jumping. You don't want to let your team down, so you're leading by example. And so those are the things that helped me when I got into politics, to basically provide that leadership. But I think the other thing is getting the education, understanding the foundation of how politics work, how life works, how business works. So the foundation at one of the historical Black colleges laid my foundation, whereas one of my professors, which I'd never thought about it, he said to me one day, do you know what? A ghetto or a barrio is easy to get to, but it's hard as heck to get out of. And I never thought about the masses just can't walk away. And so if you're going to change those dynamics, you're going to have to decide where can you best do that from. As an elected office, as an appointed official, as a combination of all that, and all the things that are facing us today. So quality education is key. And I think, that was a foundation that I learned from a lot of teachers. I had a lady that was my teacher at John Marshall Elementary. I have never forgot her. The impact that a teacher can have, Miss Anna South Davis. I had her in this 6th grade, and as of today, I would think that she provided a strong foundation for education for me back then. She cared. She shared, she provided the leadership, she provided instruction. So I think my hat's off to anybody that's in the education field. And so those are the things that I looked at. And when I went to become a elected official, and as you say, NASAC, but before NASAC, I was also the president of the National Association of State Treasurers. We had the first meeting ever in the state of New Mexico in 1987. And NASAC, we had the first meeting, and that organization was almost 100 years of age. They never had a meeting in the state of New Mexico. We brought them here.
That's because they thought they needed to have passports to bring their members here.
Exactly. So those are the types of things that, and if, people, your articulation, your mannerism, your demeanor, people really, if they will assess your leadership skills. And you can't lead anybody unless you have somebody that's going to follow you. And so those are the types of things. And all of these positions that I held, we used to go on Capitol Hill and go before Congress. I've had a chance to travel just about all over the world to a certain extent. Going to Japan to look at their education system. There was 39 of us selected throughout the United States to go do that. And we went to Tokyo and then up to Kyoto, and it was just amazing, the education system there. Had a chance to go to Jerusalem and visit there. And basically with the bonds, they wanted us to buy some Israeli bonds, but we got the education there. So again, being a leader, and people say, well, we need to learn from you, but here's some of the things that we would like for you to consider. So I think it's a two-way street.
That's right. Education always is. And just like you, I can name off all those educators that made a difference in my life, like Sharon Swallows here in Albuquerque when I was in first and second grade, living with another family because we didn't have a roof over our head. And she made me feel special and important. And then going on to Andy Jaramillo and Pam Cordova and Flora Perea. And, we can all name our educators that are special. And that's why I've always held Aleli in such high regard in terms of the 20 years she's put into the classroom, making a difference in the lives of those kids in the International District, one of the deepest pockets of poverty and also one of the most diverse pockets in the city of Albuquerque. Tell me a little bit, it struck me that, it was actually, you've said over time that John F. Kennedy was kind of the one that really inspired you to public service, that really made you believe that you could actually do something to make a difference and use public service as the vehicle to do something. And I wonder, as a young Black man, granted, he had increased the quality of the conversation, he and his brother, as it relates to civil rights. But I wonder, it struck me that you reference him, and I'm wondering, take us back to, I know Jesse Jackson was a part of that time, and tell us a little bit more about those people who influenced your life. Because when I think about my journey, I think about people like you, and I think about Raymond Sanchez and some of the others that were involved when I was young, Candy Cordova, and those people that allowed me to get engaged. Pete Rael, who's now on the bench down there in Valencia County, that was really the first campaign to let me behind the curtain as an 18-year-old boy, asked me to serve on his kitchen cabinet, and now he's on the bench 30 years later. But tell us a little bit more about that in terms, and the reason I think it's important, James, is because I could interview a lot of people who would all include you on that list of people that inspired them to public service, and I'm on that list. And so I just want to get a little bit more of that texture from you.
Well, there's two things that I looked at. When I was in 1960, I was in the 6th grade. And that's when John Kennedy was doing a lot of his work. And so as time went by, he was one of the greatest orators, I think, on this earth. And just listening to him speak just mesmerized me to say, okay, I want to do those types of things. But the other thing that he taught me in his speeches, and he had a vision. Let's go to the moon. Let's think outside the box. So those are things that I was listening to as a young man. The other thing that when I got ready to run, and going back and thinking what the impact that John Kennedy had on my life, is that everything I heard about city government, county government, state government, federal government was very negative. And so my concern is either you're part of the problem or part of the solution.
That's right.
So I decide I want to be part of the solution. And that's for, if you get on the inside and run for the office, you can promulgate policy instead of standing outside and complaining. And you not only affect policy in your area For example, in Bernalillo County, we used to have mainframe computers in there. And everybody, the clerk, the assessor, the treasurer, we had to do time sharing. So being a procurement officer over the DA's office, I knew a lot of folks in a lot of different businesses. So we actually, and Dr. Mallory was the chair of the commission back then. And I asked one of the groups to come over and do a study for us that in reference to PCs, if we could decentralize this, we could be a lot more efficient, a lot more effective. That was being fought tooth and nail by the IT folks because they wanted everything still centralized. But after we had to make that presentation, they actually started buying the PCs and they started decentralizing that. We didn't do that sharing. So those are the types of things that when Kennedy laid the foundation for me, I felt that I could provide certain leadership. And, you know, these are the things you don't hear much about, but I think it revolutionized the computer systems in the Bernalillo County.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And to hear those stories, we think about mainframe computers and, you know, Rafael doesn't know what that is. He just knows about the cloud, right? And it's just amazing how far we've come in your 40 years of service.
And that type of stuff taught back then.
COBOL and basic programming,
Yes.
BAS.
And let me just mention in the treasurer's office, if you realize that each time that I went back to the treasurer's office, the first time we had the state treasurer that got in trouble, and so therefore you had to go and clean it up. And 20 years later, it was 20 years later that I went back and you had two state treasurers got in trouble, went to the federal pen. And so, you know, again, people didn't even want to say they worked in the treasurer's office. Right. And I was in that office from 6:30 in the morning to 7 at night. I said, I did that for 2 years. I said, if you're going to turn this thing around, they had the IPOC committee. Let
me remind people, or give them the context. You did that with a commute.
Yes.
So just to be clear, James Lewis has lived in Albuquerque in a very humble home for a very long time. And he did that, those 12, 13-hour days plus a commute.
And let me tell you the rationale for that is because except during the legislative session, you are asked to speak all over the state. Yep. And probably 80% of all your presentations are in Albuquerque or Alice State. So it's not in Santa Fe. So I was saying it makes more sense for me to stay here and go to Hobbs or go to Las Cruces. But those are the types of things that, you know, people have no idea the commitment. Let me just say one other thing, if I can back up on reference to Kennedy. Sure. You know, when I decided to run for public office, and again, I have been in the office of county, run for a congressional seat, run for mayor. And so each one of those races are different. And people say, for example, if you run for county, it's the entire Bernalillo County. But if you're running for mayor, you realize if you're a Democrat, a good percentage of the valley is not in the city. So you lose a lot of support there.
I learned a little bit about that, James. Yeah. Thank you.
And then, you know, running for Congress, you had 4 different counties that you were running in. So your strategy is a lot different. A lot of people just say, tell me what your secret was when you did those things. Each race was different. It's just not a cookie cutter approach where you can say you do one thing and this, but it's hard work.
Yeah,
and you're building capacity of dealing with all the people in there, and every leadership in those areas, in those counties, in this state, all 33 counties may be a little bit different. So we really have to realize, and again, looking at John F. Kennedy and getting legislation through, and I want to also just mention one of the President Johnson. He's the one that actually was able to, after Kennedy was assassinated, able to get the 1964 Civil Rights Act through, the 1965 Voting Rights Act through. And because he had information on just about everybody in the Senate, then therefore he was able to broker these deals. And a lot of people don't realize the work that he did. So he became, and being from Texas, you know, we look at Texas today, but President Johnson, LBJ, was from the state of Texas, and brokering these deals to get the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act passed. That was a Herculean undertaking. So all of these individuals were my mentors in reference to how can you get it done. So you got to study, you got to understand. It's just not somebody say, okay, you know, you got to understand finances, you got to raise money, you got to do public speaking. So all of these things are part of the total person.
Well, I think that's right. And that's where you get it right. You've got the 3 C's lined up that you've taught all the rest of us in communication, collaboration, and cooperation. Those are the James B. Lewis 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and cooperation. And he's taught, you know, people like me that you've got to embrace those things if you're going to get the job done, because you can only get so far by yourself.
Let me just say one other thing when you talk about those 3 C's. On all my literature as I campaign, I said, number 1, you got to do what's legal, what's ethical.
Do what's ethical and do what's good for the community.
Not good for me, but good for the community.
That's right. Because I got that. Like I was going to go get them. I collect old James B. Lewis stuff, and every once in a while I'll bring it to one of our coffees. I've got a lapel pin that I bet you there are not very many of those that people still have around, but I got the great lapel pin before lapel pins were cool, James B. Lewis, with an exclamation mark, by the way, because he was always doing everything about energy, and he's always got the exclamation mark there. And I got old cards and things like that. But that's exactly right. Do what's legal, do what's ethical, and do what's best for the community. That's James B. Lewis's slogan. And that's why for years as chair of the Democratic Party, I was given the honor of introducing James B. Lewis on many occasions. And he knows this. I've always called him Mr. Integrity, because when I think about integrity and public service, there are very few people that have had the career that James Lewis has had, where you can't go out and find people that will question his integrity. And when you think of integrity, James B. Lewis is in a league of his own, because that has been your motto and you've lived it. They're not just words. And there's so many wonderful comments. And James, I know you're not a big Facebooker, but so I almost want to sit and read all these to you, but then I'm going to run out of time, so we won't get to any more of my questions. But there's some beautiful, beautiful comments here. You know, one of the great men in New Mexico by Donna Padachi, Neely Lang talks so wonderfully about you. Mandy Altamirano's tuned in. Marjorie Germain's on here. Everybody's just giving you lots of love. PLC, Patricia L. Chavez, just everybody talking about a great man you are. Claudia Anderson, Latanya. So there's just so many great comments here. Let me kind of get back to a couple of things that I was hoping to explore with you this morning, and I don't want to run out of time. But I know another one of your other favorite sayings that you've always taught me is either you've got a choice. You've got a choice in your community. You can either be part of the problem or part of the solution. And you've always encouraged me to be part of the solution, and you've helped me find a path to doing that. And I think that's another kind of value that you've embraced that's allowed you to have such impact. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit, and maybe it's for my own personal edification and growth, but you've found a way to stay so engaged. And I just want to take a minute, and you know, we've had personal conversations offline about it, but you know that my deep condolences are with you in the loss of your mom. And that's why it's been, you know, we've had, you know, about 60 Black voices that we have amplified on Cafecito con Colon. No, I'm sorry, closer to 75 now that we've amplified. And you would have been one of the first because you're closest to me in those Black voices. But we've, you know, the last couple months, we've been giving you some space to grieve and to regather. But you did something that was amazing. And a lot of people don't know this, but I first got to know you with your beautiful bride by your side, Mandy. And we all grieved with you, although we weren't as close at that time as we are now. We all grieved with you. And I guess I wonder if you could share with us, how does one continue to stay so engaged, connected, and impactful, not just after such a loss, but after what many people would perceive as being chapters that end in your life? Because you've had like 3 other chapters of service that have ended since you lost your beloved. And somehow you still are so engaged, whether it's at God's house and making sure they have a roof over their head, right? Uh, or whether it's in service to the city of Albuquerque, or in service to me, giving me, pouring into me the way you've poured. Like, I'm 50 now, and I feel like, I'm halfway there. I want to live to 100, and then I'm going to check out. But I still, and people say I'm energetic and engaged and all that, but how do you keep that energy and that engagement when you've had those chapters that have been so substantial kind of close, and then you open the next one?
Well, Brian, let me just say, I believe that my late wife, and actually it'll be 20 years next year.
Amazing.
And she was a person that was in front of me. She was beside me. She was behind me when I didn't feel like getting out, doing something. She would push me out there. Her and her sister, Joella Redmond, they were all over this state. If I had to go north, they would go south. But people would come up to me and say, "We're glad to see you, but where's Amanda?" And so, she did not meet a stranger. And in her line of work as a registered nurse, think about what's going on with the COVID now. But she worked, she was doing hospital nursing. She wanted to do clinical nursing. So she worked for Costa and the methadone clinic. And she actually administered it in the jail there. But when she passed away, probably over 1,200 people came out to her funeral. A lot of clients, because she gave them tough love. And so when I came back to run for public office this last time, I was dedicating that to her. Because again, if she would have been right there beside me, running from sun up to sundown, but she didn't meet a stranger. Every store, she was a dynamic fashion model. So she would be in every store all over this city. So those are the things that I remembered. And she came from a family. Her father was a minister, so they we were very church going, and so those are the things that you want to continue that legacy. And so that's what kept me involved, kept me engaged. I want to make a difference. I love this city. I love this state. I love this country. And as Kennedy said, don't ask what it can do for you, ask what you can do for it. So with Kennedy and Mandy and rest of the family, those are some of the motivators that stimulated me to continue to do and continue to do it today. Is I want to reverse what we call the crab syndrome. That crab reaches up and pull down as you're trying to get ahead. We need to reverse that crab syndrome, reach down and pull up. And so that is what I've been trying to do.
Well, and you have done that, right? And you talk about pulling up, and I just, let me say that you have lifted me up at every corner. And when I've suffered a loss, you've been there. When I've suffered a victory, you've been there, and you have been a source of constant support, both in front and behind the scenes. And that's you have lived that. I just want people to know that again, you speak with such eloquence and in phrases that we can all embrace, understand, and they, quotes, or James B. Lewis, we got JBL quotes all day long here, but I want people to know that these are not just quotes. These are things that you've lived by on a daily basis. And I've personally been a beneficiary of that.
And let me just mention a couple of other things that I've had a chance to do that, Bill Richardson called me when he was in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he could not make it to Gallup. And he asked me to go to Gallup and give the commencement speech there. And that was really an honor, because I was speaking to a lot of the folks that graduated with me, their kids. And the other thing that Senator Jeff Bingaman did on my behalf, when Nelson Mandela, after 29 years of being incarcerated, was released from jail, he spoke before the joint Senate and the House, and Senator Bingaman asked me to come and be his guest, to come and listen to him address that. So those are really some just things in my life that I'll never forget, and very appreciative. And Tony Anaya not only appointed me to be state treasurer, but he traveled all over northern New Mexico and said, "This is our candidate. I want you to support him." So Tony is one of the individuals that is one of my role models that did a lot in helping me to get to where I'm at today.
Well,
and the late Bruce King.
Yes, yes, and I have a beautiful picture with Tony and Governor Anaya, Governor King, Governor Apodaca, Governor Richardson, and it was the one and only time that they all four did an event together. Was an event that I hosted, and you were at that event, and it was a beautiful thing. And now, of course, that the Bruce King has passed, and I'll never forget Alice coming up to me, because we were taking pictures like for days at that event, and Alice comes up and she pushes me, and she says, "Hey," she said, "are you going to get my husband a chair to sit down? You've been taking pictures for hours." And I just remember her looking out for her husband, and I just thought, what a great partner in life, man. She was, because Bruce would have stood there for another 2 hours without a sip of water or without a chair, but she's like, "Hey, get my husband a chair." And I just have never forgotten that. And you mentioned some beautiful people, and it's amazing because you've been beside the great leaders over time for 40 years. And I think in some ways, because of your humility, you don't realize that you weren't just beside them, you were one of them. And you have inspired so many people in public service. And I've never forgotten, and I will never forget that. And I've got just a few minutes, so we're gonna do some speed questions here, because I don't wanna miss this. And this next one's not really a speed round kind of question, but you have lived through so many movements. You have watched over the last 7 years, the Black Lives Matter movement. And now, since the murder of George Floyd, something's different. Like I talked about, I didn't want this to be a flashpoint. I wanted it to be a tipping point, and in fact, it has been. Before I give you a chance to answer the question about what's been different, I want to just say that, right behind me, I keep all the books that are important to me. And this one here by Ted Sorensen, which was John F. Kennedy's special counsel, wrote a great book on John F. Kennedy. And then this one, Remembering Jack, is just a phenomenal book of intimate photographs of the Kennedys. And so those are two books I highly recommend. But tell me what's different this time, and how are you processing during this time, having lived through this, having been in the military through this, having been inspired by some of the original people who led the way with the movement. Tell me about that. What's that been like for James Lewis?
Brian, I think one of the things, I'm just elated and excited to see a movement of this magnitude. And the reason for that is diverse. You have a lot of folks, and I said, thank goodness for the cell phone, because the cell phone showed an individual with his knee on another human being's neck. And, you could keep telling people about these things, but until they visualize it and they see the picture, then they understand what you were trying to say. And I think that's the difference. Now these things are being visualized, as opposed to you had an auditory where you just talk about it, but now you can show them. And so I think that when we talk about Black Lives Matter, and then we use the term all, and we're saying, yes, all lives matter, but look what's happening to African Americans in this country. Police shootings, the disparity, as I say, economically, healthcare. A lot of them are catching the virus, and they're dying at a disproportionate rate. So I think that is what's different. It's the light is shining. It is reflecting. It's showing us that, look at here, this is what they were talking about. when you're talking about environmental justice, you're talking about criminal justice, you're talking about the incarceration system. All of that is shedding light on this today because people didn't quite understand what people were trying to say, but that picture has depicted that.
No, that's exactly right. What about this going from a peaceful protest that, yes, sometimes ends up in bad actors making some bad choices? But what about taking this? Cyrus asked about taking this to an economic movement. And we've talked about, and I know you've been part of conversations about establishing a black bank, establishing, a bank for the state of New Mexico, because it seems as though, and Cyrus's point is like, look, peaceful protests, 4 decades, here we are. The system's working just as it was designed to work, and there hasn't been any change. What if we took this to an economic protest, and how would that look? And do you think that would be the next step?
No, I think that's why you're having the commemoration of the March on Washington, because the March on Washington is saying, it was talking about exactly what we're talking about today. If you don't have economic health, if you don't have your mental health, if you don't have behavior health, you really don't have a healthy community. You don't have a healthy society. Let me say, if we invert this paradigm where you got a 1%er that's actually, and these people are making more money than they can ever spend in their whole life. Capitalism is built upon goods and services. We got a shrinking middle class. If we don't grow that middle class, I think we're going to have a lot more problems, because you're going to have the have-nots down here that don't have much of anything. And it's not only affecting African Americans, it's affecting just about every minority in this country. You look at in 2020, what is going on the Navajo Nation. They don't, 30% of the people don't have running water. 40% don't have electricity. That's unconscionable in the wealthiest country in the world. So it's not just the African American. I'm thinking about all the minorities that's coming across, people that's working in the fields. They're catching this disease, this virus here, and they're having disproportionate number of deaths because they don't have access to health care. So I think when we're talking about the bank, we're talking about business, and I'm glad to hear and see that what they're looking at trying to do is help a lot of the minority businesses and black businesses survive through this arbitrage that we got around our neck right now. And so I think that's a real plus. But as you say, we can talk about it, but if you don't implement programs and policies, and that's what I've been talking about running for public office, we not only have to look at the president, but look at the positions that's closest to us. Who's your city councilor? Who's your mayor? Who's the county commissioner? Who's the state legislature? And I have been advocating for the last 35 years to go to your city council meeting, go to your county commission meeting, understand that process. These are local government is closest to our heart. And because when the president gets elected, we don't see them day to day. But that mayor, that governor, the legislature, the city council, the county commission, those people make an impact. And we need housing. When you build that ghetto or that barrio, you got people stacked on top of each other. And so when you talk about right now with this virus, you need to have 6 feet. Well, most people's apartments only maybe X amount of feet, and there's no way they could do that. So that is what we're going to have to address going forward. And but it's going to take capital to do that. And I think, again, inverting this paradigm that we have of the pyramid at the top, where the folks are making the money and they're not giving very much to the folks down at the bottom. And if we're going to have goods and services that you're going to acquisition or you're going to purchase, you got to have money to do that. And so I think that's what we need to be working toward, is seeing how we can shift this paradigm.
That's right. I appreciate that. So 2 more quick ones. I'm gonna let you go. We're running a little bit over, but thankfully I don't have to pay for this airtime. But I know we have a hard break at 10:15. So let me just two more quick ones.
No problem.
One is, I know I surround myself with I've got my wall of gratitude here with pictures with you and all these other folks that have inspired me over the years, and I'm surrounded by the books that give me the knowledge and the lens I look through, and then pictures of my family over my shoulder here. Um, Picture of our first African-American president of the United States. Right there. Yes, we can.
I got one back here too.
And that's my question for you. I was framing up the question. Tell us about the photographs, who's behind you, and how they've inspired you.
Well, I have a picture of President Obama, and again, let me just say, when I was state treasurer, when he got elected, and I know the picking process in politics, the word I kept hearing is not your time. And when Cheryl Williams Stapleton and a lot of us, when we had a press conference on the Capitol steps, they asked me to get up and speak. And I said, when I say what time it is, you say it's Obama time, because people keep saying it's not his time. And so you got to go against the flow of the water and say, I'm going uphill, I'm going to make it happen. So he has really had a tremendous impact. And people don't realize when he inherited that office from President Bush, the stock market was at about 6,000, and he got it up to over 18,000. So and you looked at the unemployment, it was about 12%. He got it less than 4.7%. People don't know those things because they don't watch the stock markets that well. But you got a president that's trying to take credit for all this, but all this started under him. So I have the utmost admiration. I've had a chance to go to the White House and visit with him, had a chance to go and visit with Vice President Biden at his home as well. So those are people that have been mentors to me. I also have, I don't know if you see this here.
Yes, indeed. Look at that. That's a great one. See, that's on my bucket list. I haven't been able to complete it. I love President Carter, and I just have never been able to get our paths to cross. I got close, was with his daughter. That's beautiful.
And I have, a couple other entertainers that I had a chance when they came through Albuquerque to have photos with them. So again, I'm just honored. I've had many, many opportunities that the average person probably wouldn't have an opportunity to do.
Well, you've deserved every one of them, and you've leveraged those opportunities to inspire those of us that are following you and want to have a portion of the impact you've had to do the work that we do. When people compare me to James B. Lewis, there's not a higher compliment, and I mean that. And if I can be compared to any elected official, having people say in any small way, I am emulating your work and your passion. There's literally not another elected official in the history of the state of New Mexico. And that goes all the way back 108 years. All the people who've inspired me along the way, there's not a higher compliment than that when people say that about me and James Lewis. And let me close with this final question.
Okay.
And I haven't asked this to anybody else in a couple hundred episodes of Cafecito con Colon. When you've got about another 30 years left on the journey, I've got 50. So I'm hopeful that the order of operations stays that way, and I get to be there to honor your memory when that time comes. How does James Lewis want to be remembered by others?
Well, basically, I as a public servant, it's not what you take, it's what you give. And I wanted to be a giver, not a taker. And so that is the way I would want to be remembered, primarily as that person that was very passionate, very caring, very sharing, very loving. And those are the types of adjectives that sort of define me, is that it wasn't about me, it's about this community, it's about this country. And so those are the things that I felt that I wanted to exemplify as a public servant, as a human being, is that can I make it better for the next person, for the next generation? If I can lay that foundation, then they don't have to go through the same trial and tribulations that I had to go through.
Your legacy will be felt for many generations to come. And I am grateful that you've been a part of my journey in my closest orbit. And I will close with gratitude. Gratitude to you, not just for what you've done for me, but what you've done for the state of New Mexico and the ripple effect you've had because of the philosophies that you embrace on a daily basis and that you apply in the work you do day after day after day, because you are not the retiring type, thankfully.
Well, Brian, let me just tell you, I have the utmost admiration and appreciation for you because, you know, you raise large sums of money. People may not realize that for Pope Joy, for other nonprofits within this city, within this state. And it takes a big heart to do that. And it takes the being genuine, the saying, yes, I want to do it when you don't have to do it. So I want to let you know that I appreciate and my eyes are on you because you're doing a lot of great things. And this program, this show, to share with the rest of a lot of people in this state, maybe outside the state, some perspectives that they probably would never have had an opportunity to hear about. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
It is my honor and privilege, and ladies and gentlemen, that is the incredible James B. Lewis, Mr. Integrity, and I'm grateful for him. I love you, James. Thank you for being my friend, and thank you for the work you do. We will continue to stay in touch and engaged, and tomorrow we'll be back here at 9 a.m. We've got Mo Fit White, who's going to join us, who is a fitness expert and just an incredible entrepreneur here in Albuquerque, who you're going to love. Another Black voice that we're going to amplify in this series on Cafecito con Colon, as we have, since the murder of George Floyd, lifted up and amplified Black voices to make a difference, to help us understand the lived experience and journey of those members in our community that sometimes don't have a voice, sometimes are on the margins and are often invisible. We are going to shine the light and lift them up. So thank you, James, for being with me today. We're going to call it a wrap on Cafecito con Colon, but that's not a wrap on our relationship. I'll continue to reach out to you and continue to seek your good counsel, because I'm a better man when James B. Lewis pours into me.
Keep the pace and the faith.
You got it, James. Thank you very much. God bless. See you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Folks, I posted as the last link for today, I just released last night, that in honor of the 30th anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act, the 30th anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act, I'm going to be doing some spot checks to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable in government, to make sure that our government buildings are accessible to those in terms of compliance with parking lot access for our buildings. So we're going to roll that out. We're going to talk about that. As those of you that know me know, this is personal. I want to make sure that we shine a light on the importance of compliance with the American with Disabilities Act on now its 30th anniversary, the most recent civil rights movement that gave access and a voice to those with disabilities. So look, make it a great day. Have a beautiful Friday. Call somebody who's alone and make sure they know they may be in isolation, but that we're thinking about them. We send our love. Make it a great day. I'll see you in 23 hours right here, right then on Cafecito con Colon. Thank you. Bye-bye.